Good morning. My name's Don. I'm a pastor at Lifechurch Devotional. And I've been thinking over Easter, which recently, about the way different people responded to Jesus after his resurrection. And I became intrigued with Thomas, one of his followers. And another follower of Jesus who was there at the time wrote these things about Thomas and about Jesus. After these things, Jesus appeared again to the disciples, this time at the Tiberias Sea, the Sea of Galilee. This is how he did it. Simon Peter, Thomas nicknamed the twin, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the brothers Zebedee, and two other disciples were together. And so this is after Jesus' resurrection. That is John 21, verses 1 and 2. And these 7 men were probably staying together in the same house. Possibly the other disciples were nearby. We don't know. They weren't mentioned. And I can't imagine the emotional and mental state that these men had been in. Jesus had been arrested and put on trial. He'd been condemned to death. He'd been tortured and crucified. He had died and been buried. And so they were in tremendous turmoil. All their hopes seemed to have died with Jesus. And so in grief and fear, they'd gone into hiding from the authorities. But Jesus had risen from the grave. He was alive, visible, and able to be physically touched. And he visited them twice after his resurrection. And John chapter 20, verse 19, it's written, it was late that Sunday evening, and the disciples were gathered together behind locked doors, because they were afraid of the Jewish authorities. Then Jesus came and stood among them. Peace be with you, he said. And then a few verses later, verses 24 to 29, it tells us that one of the disciples, Thomas, the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. So when he came back to the place where the other disciples were, they said to him, Jesus is risen. And he said, I don't believe you. Unless I see the scars of the nails in his hands and put my finger on those scars and my hand in his side, I will not believe. That's what his response was. A week later, the disciples were together again indoors, and Thomas was with them. The doors were locked, but Jesus came and stood amongst them. Peace be with you. Then he said to Thomas, put your finger here, look at my hands, then reach out your hand and put it in my side. Stop your doubting and believe. Thomas answered him, my Lord and my God. Jesus said to him, do you believe because you see me? How happy are those who believe without seeing. Now, for a long time, I have thought that many preachers have been hard on Thomas. I've often heard them call him Doubting Thomas. And because he didn't believe the others who told him Jesus had risen. But Luke 24, verses 10 to 12 clearly state that when eyewitness testimony was given to the other 10 disciples about the resurrection of Jesus, they refused to believe. They too doubted, but no one calls them the doubting 10. So I think Thomas gets a bad rap in that. Another thing that occurred was that the 10 were hiding in fear of the Jewish authorities. But Thomas was not hiding with them. He was out and about in the city. Thomas was a different kind of guy. In John 11:16, it is suggested that Thomas was brave and willing to face danger, even death, with Jesus. So we should be careful about labeling people. But if I were to put a label on Thomas, it would probably be Thomas the Brave. Sounds a little bit like a title out of the Chronicles of Narnia, I know. But Thomas was actually a brave man. He wasn't overcome by fear. And after that second appearance of Jesus, John records that at least 7 of them, and he was one of them, were in Galilee. They had not chosen to escape from Jerusalem out of fear, and they hadn't travelled on a whim. And because they had nothing else to do, they'd gone to Galilee. It wasn't anything like that at all. They were there because Jesus had twice said they should go there after his resurrection. That's Matthew 26:32, Matthew 28:10. So they were in Galilee because Jesus wanted them to be there. In a time of great crisis, by faith in Jesus, it's advisable to be where he wants us to be, mentally, emotionally, and physically. To be in that space where Jesus comes to us and we can recognize him. So here they were in Galilee because Jesus wanted them there. And John 21, verses 1 and 2, John writes this: After this, Jesus appeared once more to his disciples at Lake Tiberias. This is how it happened. Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael, the one from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples of Jesus were all together. I've wondered at this shortened list of the disciples. In the lists given elsewhere in the gospel records, Thomas is mentioned either as number 7 or number 8, and he's only mentioned by name 9 times. A lot less than some of the others, but more than most. But here he is mentioned prominently, right after Peter, and ahead of James and John, and the 2 that aren't named. What had occurred that will cause John to put Thomas next after Peter? Well, Thomas had experienced a life-transforming, one-on-one, personal encounter with the risen Jesus. Even though the others were there and looking on and listening, Jesus turned his meeting with the disciples into an individual, personal connection with Thomas. Here's my side, put your hand here. Here's my hands, put your finger there. It was personal interaction. I remember my first personal initial encounter with Jesus and how dramatically he changed my life. He changed it so much that my friends noticed and weren't happy about it because they knew somehow I had changed and was no longer doing what they were doing. We all need an initial encounter with the risen Jesus, but like these men, we all need to continually encounter him. Our changed lives are maintained by continuing our relationship with Jesus. And so that is what Jesus did. Now, it's 3 times he had shown himself to these men. Jesus wants to meet with us. He wanted to meet with them. He told them, go there and I'll join you. It was Jesus' initiative. And I believe that that is how he is with us. He wants us to meet with him on a regular basis. There's other things in this little encounter concerning Thomas that we can apply to our own lives. First one is, don't harm people by putting labels on their lives. That's what's happened to Thomas. I live with a variety of labels that were on my life. Some of them I earned because of the way I was living and the things I did. But most of them were judgmental and put me in a box that people didn't think could change. Continued life-changing encounters with the risen Jesus will nullify the power of labels that others put on us. And that's what Thomas experienced. We should expect to be changed by the risen Jesus. All I ever wanted to do in life was to live and work in hill country, hunt wild boar and go fishing. Now, because of Jesus, I have traveled the world, seen amazing things, met amazing people, and hunted wild boar and gone fishing. Jesus changed my life. He changed the direction of my life, and it has been exciting and interesting My life with Jesus has been an adventure. Jesus sought out these men and showed himself to them. He wants to show himself to us in ways that will dramatically and positively change who we are and how we live. He will transform our future. Thomas went on to leave an amazing legacy that still positively affects people's lives today. I have met people in India whose family can trace back unbroken generation after generation of believers in Jesus to the Apostle Thomas, who went to India and started the first church there. Thomas left a legacy that will last into eternity because he had a personal encounter with the risen Jesus. And I believe that Jesus wants that for all of us. I believe that he wants all of us to have an encounter with him that will bring to our lives the things from God that will change us for the better and make us into people that can live in God's family. I don't know if you've had that encounter, but if you have you had ongoing encounters? Is he constantly encountering you and your life? Jesus. If you would like to know more, please contact us at Lifechurch. We would like to be able to speak with you. Thank you.